All right, so we're taking a deep dive into this document outlining predicted and scheduled global events for 2025.
Okay.
Election sporting events, technological shifts, even a trip back to the moon.
Wow.
2025 looks like a roller coaster.
Hmm.
And predictions are always a bit of a gamble. But let's see what we've got. What jumps out at you?
The sheer volume of events is remarkable. 2025 seems like a convergence point for a multitude of global trends.
Yeah. Okay, so first up, the sporting arena. We've got a tax schedule. Handball Winter University Games, Special Olympics, FIFA Club World Cup, World Aquatics Championships, Summer World University Games, World Games, and World Athletics Championships.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot of events crammed into a single year. What's going on here?
It begs the question, is this purely coincidental, or is there a deeper trend at play? Could it be a sign of nations leveraging these events for political or economic advantage?
Interesting point.
Mm.
It's not just about the games themselves, but the potential geopolitical maneuvering happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. And think about the economic implications. Hosting these events can be a major boost for a nation's economy, but it also comes with significant costs and potential risks.
Okay, let's shift gears to the political landscape. Elections in Ecuador, Liechtenstein, Germany, Poland, Norway, Argentina, and Chile.
Yeah.
Quite a few key players on the list.
The German federal election in particular stands out. Considering the recent political landscape, the outcome of this election could have ripple effects across Europe.
Speaking of ripple effects, two developments caught my eye in the financial and tech world. The introduction of the Caribbean Guilder and Microsoft pulling the plug on Windows 10 support.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts?
The Caribbean Guilder is a fascinating case study. Introducing a new currency always carries inherent risks. How will it impact regional economic stability? Could this be a sign of shifting global financial power dynamics?
Good questions. And the end of Windows 10 support.
Mm-hmm.
Millions of users are going to have to upgrade.
Right.
That's a potential goldmine for cybercriminals.
Absolutely. End-of-life software is notorious for security vulnerabilities. This raises serious questions about cybersecurity preparedness, not just for individuals, but for governments and businesses as well.
All right, let's move on to some potentially history-making moments. The Artemis II mission, our return to the moon after decades, and the first ever esports Olympics. Big stuff.
Artemis II is a huge step for space exploration. It's not just about revisiting the moon, it's about establishing a long-term presence. Are we on the cusp of a new era of lunar exploration?
It's certainly ambitious. And the
Mhm.
esports Olympics, that's a game changer. It speaks volumes about the cultural impact of esports.
Indeed, this could be a pivotal moment in the evolution of competitive gaming, potentially blurring the lines between traditional sports and esports.
Now, there are a bunch of events with date unknown status that pique my curiosity. Canadian and Singaporean elections, Starship test flights, Albanian and Czech parliamentary elections, an ecumenical meeting, and Norway's petrol diesel car ban. What's the story with these?
The lack of concrete dates for some of these events is intriguing. It suggests a certain level of volatility and unpredictability. Take the Canadian and Singaporean elections. While they are bound by deadlines, the specific dates are at the discretion of their governments. Could this indicate strategic political maneuvering?
Interesting. It's almost like they're holding their cards close to the chest, waiting for the opportune moment.
Precisely. And then you have events like the Starship test flights, which are inherently subject to unforeseen technological challenges.
Right. Even with meticulous planning, some things are simply beyond our control.
Absolutely. The same could be said for the Albanian and Czech parliamentary elections. The lack of specific dates suggests that the political landscapes in those countries are in a state of flux.
So we're seeing a mix of deliberate ambiguity and inherent uncertainty at play here. It makes you wonder what other surprises 2025 might have in store.
Indeed, the future is rarely predictable, and these date-unknown events serve as a potent reminder of that.
Okay, one last point before we wrap up this part. This document mentions 2025 as a common year. It seems like an insignificant detail, but it made me wonder what exactly makes a year common.
It's an intriguing observation. In the grand scheme of things, the distinction between a common year and a leap year is trivial. It's merely a calendar construct.
Right. But given all the potentially groundbreaking events we've just discussed, the label common year seems almost ironic. Do you think we place too much emphasis on these arbitrary divisions of time?
Perhaps. The potential for extraordinary events exists regardless of how we label the year. The future unfolds on its own terms.
It's a humbling thought. We can analyze and predict, but ultimately the future remains a mystery, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
I couldn't agree more. There's a certain allure to the unknown, a sense of anticipation that drives our curiosity and fuels our desire to explore. It's like we're looking at a tapestry of interconnected events, each thread influencing the others.
Right, and some of these connections are pretty clear-cut. Take the end of Windows 10 support. It's not just about individual users. It has far-reaching cybersecurity implications for businesses and governments, too.
Absolutely. Imagine a scenario where critical infrastructure relies on systems running outdated software. The potential for disruption is enormous.
Okay, that's a scary thought. But what about the less obvious connections? How might something like the introduction of the Caribbean Guilder impact, say, the political landscape in Europe?
That's where things get really interesting. The Caribbean Guilder could potentially disrupt existing trade relationships and financial flows. This could create economic vulnerabilities that savvy political actors might exploit.
So, seemingly isolated events can have unintended consequences that reverberate across the globe. It's like a domino effect,
Precisely. And the speed at which information and capital flow in our interconnected world only amplifies these effects.
which makes it all the more important to understand these connections, right? To be able to anticipate potential consequences.
Exactly. We need to think beyond the immediate headlines and consider the broader context.
Okay, so we're all interconnected, and even small changes can have big consequences.
Uh,
What does this mean for us as individuals?
It means we can't afford to be passive observers. We need to be informed, engaged citizens who understand these complex dynamics and participate in shaping the future.
So no more burying our heads in the sand.
Right. The world is
Yeah.
too interconnected for that. We need to be aware of the issues, engage in thoughtful dialogue, and hold our leaders accountable.
All right, let's bring it back to 2025. We've got a lot of unknowns on the list. Those seem particularly relevant to this idea of interconnectedness and unintended consequences.
Agreed. Those date-unknown events add a layer of uncertainty that makes predicting the future even more challenging. They are the wild cards that could completely reshape the landscape.
Speaking of wildcards, I'm curious about the comet C-2024-G3, which might be visible to the naked eye in January. It's a reminder that there are forces at play that are entirely beyond our control.
Indeed, sometimes the cosmos throws us a curveball. It's a humbling reminder of our place in the universe.
Okay, let's touch on those sporting events again.
Yeah.
You mentioned the World Athletics Championships in Tokyo. It's always a spectacle.
Absolutely. It's a showcase of human athleticism at its peak. But it also raises questions about the pressure on athletes, the use of technology in sports, and the commercialization of these events.
Right, it's not just about the competition, it's about the larger societal forces at play. And then there's the esports Olympics. Do you think this could change how we view competitive gaming?
It has the potential to legitimize esports on a global scale, but it also raises questions about inclusivity, accessibility, and the potential for exploitation in a rapidly growing industry.
So even seemingly positive developments come with their own set of challenges and questions.
Exactly. There are always trade-offs, unintended consequences, and ethical considerations to grapple with.
All right, let's shift focus for a moment. The planned ecumenical meeting between the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches is something we haven't explored in depth. It's shrouded in mystery, but it could have significant implications.
It's a fascinating case study in interfaith dialogue. What are the motivations behind this meeting? What are the potential obstacles to unity?
Right, and how might this impact global religious dynamics? Could this be a catalyst for greater understanding and cooperation between different faiths?
It's certainly a hopeful prospect, but navigating centuries of theological differences and political tensions won't be easy.
So while this meeting is a positive step, it's important to be realistic about the challenges involved.
Absolutely. Real progress requires a genuine commitment to dialogue understanding and a willingness to compromise.
All right, we've been talking about the broader implications of these events, but let's bring it back to our listeners. How can they make sense of all this information and extract meaning from it?
That's the key question. It's not just about passively absorbing information, it's about actively engaging with it. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, and connect the dots.
So it's not just about what's happening, but why it matters and what it means for us individually and collectively.
Precisely. Develop a critical lens, consider multiple perspectives, and don't be afraid to dig deeper.
It's about becoming informed citizens who can participate in shaping the future.
Exactly. The future is not predetermined. It's something we create through our actions and choices.
Okay, one last point before we wrap up this part. Earlier, we talked about the common year designation for 2025. It sparked a discussion about our perception of time. What are your thoughts on that?
Time is a fascinating concept. We measure it, divide it, and try to control it, but ultimately it flows on its own terms, indifferent to our attempts to impose order.
Right, and yet we imbue specific dates and years with significance. We create narratives around them, ascribing meaning to events that unfold within those arbitrary boundaries.
It's a testament to our human need to make sense of the world, to find patterns and meaning in the chaos.
But perhaps there's a danger in that as well. By focusing too narrowly on specific dates or events, do we risk missing the bigger picture?
That's a valid point. It's important to maintain perspective, to recognize that events unfold within a larger historical context and that their significance often extends far beyond the immediate moment.
So while it's natural to focus on the year 2025, we need to remember that it's just one chapter in a much larger story, a story that's still being written.
Precisely. And each of us has a role to play in shaping that story.
So we've covered a lot of ground, from geopolitical implications of sporting events to the potential for economic disruption and the unknowns lurking in the future. But I'm curious, are there any events that strike you as particularly peculiar?
Well, peculiar is subjective, but some events certainly stand out as unconventional.
All right, give me an example. What's got you raising an eyebrow?
The first esports Olympics in Saudi Arabia is a fascinating development. Holding a traditionally technology-driven competition in a nation often associated with traditional values seems paradoxical.
That's a great point. It highlights the evolving cultural landscape and the clash between tradition and modernity. Do you think this could signal a broader shift in Saudi Arabia's global image?
It's certainly a possibility. Hosting such a high-profile event could be a strategic move to attract investment-boost tourism and showcase a more progressive side of the nation.
So the Esports Olympics could be more than just a sporting event. It could be a carefully calculated step in a larger geopolitical strategy.
Precisely. And that's what makes these events so intriguing. There's always more beneath the surface layers of meaning and motivation that shape the course of events.
Okay, let's revisit the date-unknown events. We touched on the possibility of political maneuvering behind the flexible timelines of the Canadian and Singaporean elections. But what about the technological uncertainties surrounding the Starship test flights?
Starship represents a bold vision for space travel, but it's also a highly complex and ambitious project. The lack of a firm schedule speaks to the inherent challenges involved.
Right, and those challenges aren't limited to technology. There were regulatory hurdles, safety concerns, and the ever-present pressure of public opinion.
Exactly. Space exploration is a high-stakes endeavor, and any misstep can have far-reaching consequences.
And then there's the potential ban on petrol and diesel cars in Norway. A bold move, but is it achievable by 2025?
Norway has been a leader in electric vehicle adoption, but a complete ban on petrol and diesel cars within such a tight time frame is ambitious. It hinges on factors like infrastructure development, consumer affordability, and the global supply chain for electric vehicles.
So while the goal is commendable, there are practical considerations that could delay or even derail the plan.
Absolutely. And this highlights a recurring theme. We've observed the tension between aspiration and reality. We set ambitious goals, but unforeseen challenges often force us to adapt and adjust our timelines.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something that's been lingering in my mind. Earlier, we discussed the comet C2024G3, which might be visible to the naked eye in January. It got me thinking about the role of chance and randomness in shaping the future.
It's a fascinating point. Amidst all our planning and predicting, we often overlook the role of serendipity. A comet streaking across the sky, a chance encounter, an unexpected discovery. These seemingly random events can have profound impacts on our lives and on the course of history.
It's almost like the universe is reminding us that we're not fully in control, that there's always an element of mystery and unpredictability at play.
Exactly. We can analyze trends, make predictions, and strategize, but ultimately, the future unfolds in its own way, often defying our expectations.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners as they navigate this complex and ever-changing world?
Embrace curiosity. Stay informed, challenge your assumptions, and be open to the unexpected. The future is a tapestry woven from countless threads, and each of us has a role to play in shaping its design.
Well said. So as we stand on the precipice of 2025, let's remember that the future is not a fixed destination, but rather a journey filled with possibilities and surprises. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into 2025. We hope it's given you food for thought as we all prepare for the year ahead.
It's been a pleasure.